Have you ever given everything you had to someone and then watched them look right through you? Like you weren't even there? I'm 63 years old. I raised my son on my own after his father walked out when the boy was 4. I worked double shifts at the hospital for 11 years as a licensed vocational nurse. I drove a car with a cracked dashboard and a broken air conditioner in Georgia summers so that my son, Donovan, could have new sneakers and school supplies and a bedroom that was just his. I didn't take vacations. I didn't buy myself jewelry or nice clothes. Every extra dollar went to him, and I would do it all again. That's the thing people never understand about a mother's love. It doesn't calculate. It doesn't keep a ledger. You just give, and you give, and you give, because that child is your whole heart walking around outside your body. But there's a difference between love and being used, and it took me longer than I'd like to admit to learn that difference. Donovan was a good boy growing up. Quiet, a little serious, loved to read. He had my mother's eyes, that deep, patient brown, that made you feel like he was always listening even when he wasn't. He went to a state college on a partial scholarship and I covered the rest. I was so proud of him, I cried at his graduation for 20 minutes straight. The woman sitting next to me handed me 3 tissues and still had to offer a 4th. He met Simone Beaumont his 2nd year of graduate school. I remember the first time he brought her home for Thanksgiving. She was beautiful. I'll give her that. Long, natural hair, dressed sharp. The kind of woman who knew exactly how she looked in every room she walked into. She shook my hand and said, "Donovan has told me so much about you," and smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. I noticed it. I filed it away. I told myself I was being a suspicious old woman. They got married 2 years later. Donovan was 31. The wedding was elegant. A venue outside of Atlanta, flowers everywhere, a jazz band for the reception. It cost $42,000. I know exactly how much it cost because I paid for most of it. Simone's family contributed a small amount. Her father, Mr. Beaumont, was charming and well-dressed and arrived in a very nice car. But when the bills started coming in, suddenly everyone was looking at me. Donovan called and said the florist needed a deposit. Then the caterer needed a deposit. Then the venue needed the balance settled 2 weeks before the date. Each time I asked Simone's family for their portion, there was an excuse, a delay, a misunderstanding about who was covering what. I paid it, because it was my son's wedding and I didn't want him to be embarrassed. That should have been my first sign. After the wedding, Donovan and Simone moved into an apartment in Buckhead. Nice area, nice building, more than a young couple just starting out should probably have been spending. Donovan was working as a financial analyst, decent salary, but not extravagant. Simone had a degree in communications and worked part-time at a boutique PR firm, which, from what I could tell, meant she attended a lot of lunches and events and did not appear to be under significant professional pressure. The calls started a few months in. Small things at first. Donovan needed help covering a car payment because they'd had an unexpected expense. Could I wire $300? Then it was $500. Then $1,000. Once, it was $3,000 because their rent had gone up and the new amount hit before Donovan's paycheck cleared. I always said yes, because he was my son. Because I had raised him alone, and I still felt, somewhere deep in me, that I owed him something for all the years I hadn't been able to give him what 2-parent households could give their children. I should have looked more closely at where the money was actually going. My friend Celestine. We've been friends since before Donovan was born. She was in my delivery room when he came into this world. Celestine pulled me aside one evening when I'd gone over to her house for dinner. She'd seen something on Simone's social media, a photo. Simone and 2 of her friends at a resort in the Bahamas. The caption said something about a girl's trip that was long overdue. That same week, I had wired Donovan $800 because he said they needed to cover a medical bill. I called him. I asked him, very calmly, how Simone had gone to the Bahamas if they were struggling to cover a medical bill. There was a pause on the line that lasted long enough to tell me everything. Then he said the trip had been planned months ago and it wasn't a big deal, and I was making something out of nothing. I let it go. I don't know why I let it go. Maybe I just wasn't ready to see what was right in front of me. When Simone got pregnant, I was overjoyed. Genuinely, completely, from the bottom of my soul overjoyed. I had been waiting to be a grandmother for a long time. I started buying things the moment she announced it. a crib, a rocking chair. Little outfits in pale yellow because they didn't know the sex yet. I drove to Atlanta to be there for the baby shower, which was held at a rooftop event space and catered, and which, I later found out, I had also mostly paid for, because the charge showed up on the credit card I had given Donovan for family emergencies. My granddaughter was born in November. They named her Ava. I was in the waiting room at the hospital for 9 hours. When the nurse came out and told me she was here, I burst into tears. I couldn't wait to hold her. Donovan came out eventually and hugged me and showed me a photo on his phone. But when I asked to go in and see Simone and the baby, he got a strange look on his face and said, "She's pretty tired, maybe give it a little bit." I waited another hour. Then I asked again. He said Simone wasn't up for visitors just yet. "I am Ava's grandmother, I am not a visitor." But I sat back down. A nurse I knew from my years in healthcare, I won't say her name, but she was kind. She passed by the waiting room and caught my eye, and I could tell from her expression that something was off. She couldn't tell me anything, of course, but that look stayed with me. Finally, close to 9 o'clock that night, Donovan came back out and said that Simone was tired and they were going to rest and maybe I could come by the house on off a few days to meet Ava properly. I drove home to Macon alone. 2.5 hours. I cried for most of it. I told myself it was just the hormones, the exhaustion of new parenthood, the stress. I told myself it would get better once they settled in. The first time I visited the house, Ava was 11 days old. I brought food. A full home-cooked meal, enough for a week, because I know how hard those early weeks are. I brought more baby gifts. I was so eager to hold that little girl that my hands were actually trembling when I rang the doorbell. Simone answered. She was dressed nicely, not like a woman who had just given birth 11 days ago, but like a woman who had spent time on herself, which struck me, but I didn't say anything. She thanked me for the food and brought me inside. Ava was in a bassinet in the living room, asleep. I leaned over to pick her up and Simone said very quickly, "Oh, she just fell asleep. I'd rather not wake her." I pulled my hands back. I sat on the couch. I watched my granddaughter sleep from 3 feet away. Donovan was there, but he barely looked at me. He was on his phone most of the time. When I tried to talk to him about Ava, how she was eating, sleeping, if she had her checkup, Simone answered everything. Donovan let her. I stayed for 2 hours. I never held Ava. I went home and I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I called Celestine and I cried on the phone with her until nearly midnight. Over the next 6 weeks, I tried to visit 3 more times. Each time, there was a reason I couldn't hold Ava. She was sleeping. She was fussy, and only Simone could calm her. She had just eaten and needed to be kept still. Once, I reached out to pick her up and Simone physically stepped between me and the bassinet and said, "I'd really prefer if we kept her on a schedule." She was 6 weeks old. There is no schedule more important than a grandmother holding her grandchild. I asked Donovan privately, on the phone, what was happening. He told me I was overreacting. He said Simone was very particular about Ava's routine, and I needed to respect that. He said, "Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be." I was making it harder. I had paid for the wedding. I had paid for the baby shower. I had sent thousands of dollars over 3 years for expenses that never quite added up. I had sat in a hospital waiting room for 9 hours, and I was making it harder. Something shifted in me that night. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter. Something that had been trying to get my attention for a long time, and I had been refusing to let it speak. I started paying closer attention. I asked Donovan to send me documentation for the next expense. A request to help cover a home repair, he said. He sent me a contractor estimate. I happened to mention it to my neighbor Raymond, who does home renovation work, and he looked at the estimate and said the numbers were inflated by about 40%, and the company name on the letterhead didn't match any licensed contractor in the county. I called the number on the estimate. It was disconnected. I sat with that for 3 days before I said anything. I kept hoping I was wrong. I went back through 2 years of emergency requests and started writing things down on paper, old-fashioned, because I needed to see it clearly. The amounts, the explanations, the timing. A car repair the week after a photo of Simone wearing a watch I'd never seen before. A utility emergency the month their lease renewal would have come due on that Buckhead apartment. Requests that came in clusters, 2 or 3 close together, then a quiet period, then another cluster. It wasn't sloppy. It was patterned. That was the part that stayed with me. Someone had thought about this. I don't know exactly when I understood that Simone was the one driving it. Maybe I'd always known and hadn't let myself say it. Donovan was not a dishonest person by nature, but he had married a woman who was very good at constructing a reality and inviting people to live inside it. And Donovan, who had always wanted peace more than anything, had chosen to live inside it. I called my financial advisor, a woman named Patricia Ossie, who I've worked with for over a decade. I told her everything. She was calm and professional, but her voice got very still in the way it does when someone is trying not to say something alarming too loudly. She helped me go through my accounts and document the full amount I had transferred to Donovan and Simone over 3 years. $67,000. Between the wedding, the shower, and the ongoing emergencies. I sat in Patricia's office and stared at that number on the page. And I thought about my cracked dashboard. I thought about Georgia summers with no air conditioning. I thought about the shoes I didn't buy, and the vacations I didn't take, and the retirement contributions I had deferred because there was always something my son needed. $67,000 that had gone to fund a lifestyle in Buckhead with a woman who wouldn't let me hold my own grandchild. I made 2 decisions that day. The first, no more money. Not a single dollar, for any reason, to Donovan and Simone. Not until things changed significantly and dramatically. The second, I was going to stop pretending everything was fine. I called Donovan the following Sunday. I told him I wanted to come to Atlanta and have a real conversation, face to face, the 3 of us. He sounded nervous immediately but agreed. When I arrived, Simone was in the kitchen. Donovan looked like a man who hadn't slept well. I sat down at their dining table, a table I had helped pay for, as it happened, and I took out the piece of paper where I had written down every transfer, every amount, every date, and stated reason, going back 3 years. I put it on the table. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Simone said, "I don't know what you're trying to imply." I said, "I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you what I see. And I'm telling you that it stops today." Donovan said, "Mom," I said, "let me finish." I told them that I had spent 3 years sending money whenever they called and asking nothing in return. I told them about the contractor estimate that didn't match any licensed business. I told them about the Bahamas trip. I told them about 6 weeks of being unable to hold my own granddaughter. My voice broke once, on that last part. I didn't try to hold it back. I let it break. I said, "I am Ava's grandmother, and I have not once been allowed to hold her, while the 2 of you have been perfectly comfortable letting me fund your life." Simone's face did something complicated. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was the face of someone who had been caught and was rapidly calculating their next move. She said that she had boundaries about Ava's care and that I had never respected them. I said, "What boundary? Name one rule you told me clearly and I violated." She couldn't answer that, because there had never been rules. There had only been roadblocks. Donovan looked at the paper on the table, and then he looked at his wife, and then he looked at me. And I could see something moving across his face, something that looked like a man waking up and realizing he'd been asleep for a very long time. He said quietly, "Mom, I didn't know about some of this." Simone turned to him fast. "Donovan," he said, "the contractor. I gave you the money she sent for the contractor. You told me you handled it." The room got very still. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. What came out over the next hour was not pleasant, but it was necessary. Donovan had known about some of the expenses, had genuinely believed they were real needs. But others he hadn't known the details of. The Bahamas trip, 2 other charges I pointed out, where the amount sent to him didn't match anything he could account for. Simone had been intercepting money before it reached the joint account. This is the part that broke something in Donovan. Not that I had stopped supporting them. Not that I was angry. It was that she had lied to him too. I left Atlanta that afternoon. I drove back to Macon. I was exhausted in a way that went beyond tired. The kind of exhausted that comes from finally putting down something very heavy after carrying it for years. Celestine came over that evening with a bottle of sweet tea and a pound cake, and we sat on my porch until the sun went all the way down. I didn't cry this time. I just talked. And she listened. And somewhere around the 4th hour of sitting there in the warm Georgia dark, I realized I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Relief. Donovan called me 2 days later. He had moved out of the Buckhead apartment and was staying with a friend. He and Simone had a long and apparently devastating conversation that I was not present for, and I did not ask for the details because it was his marriage and his pain to process. But he told me he had talked to a lawyer. Not to divorce her yet. He wasn't sure what he wanted to do. But to understand what his options were and to figure out the extent of what had happened. Patricia helped me compile the documentation, and Donovan took it to his attorney. Simone, it turned out, had opened a separate account that Donovan didn't know about. The money I sent, the portions she'd skimmed, had been going in there for over 2 years. She had also used his credit card for several transactions he hadn't authorized, buying things he never saw and couldn't account for. The attorney told Donovan this likely constituted financial fraud within the marriage, and possibly fraud against me directly, given the fabricated contractor estimate. Donovan filed the appropriate reports. I don't know exactly where the legal proceedings stand right now. Donovan keeps me updated, but I don't press him for every detail. That's his road to walk. What I know is that Simone Beaumont moved out of that apartment, and that 6 weeks after Donovan filed, I drove back to Atlanta on a Saturday morning. Donovan met me at the door. He looked different, older somehow, and quieter, but something behind his eyes was clearer than it had been in years. He hugged me for a long time at the door, the way he used to when he was little and something had frightened him. He stepped back and said, "She's awake. She's been waiting for her grandma." He put Ava in my arms. She was 3 months old, and she smelled like baby powder and something impossibly sweet. And she looked up at me with those wide, unfocused newborn eyes, and I started talking to her. I don't even remember what I said. Something about how I'd been wanting to meet her properly. Something about how her great-grandmother would have loved her. Something about how she was going to be just fine. That we were all going to be just fine. I held her for almost 2 hours. Donovan sat across from me, and we talked, really talked, the way we hadn't in longer than I could remember. He told me he was sorry. Not in a rushed, let's move past this way, but slowly, deliberately, like a man who had been thinking about what he wanted to say for a while. He said, "I let things happen that I shouldn't have. I kept telling myself it was fine because I didn't want to look at it. That's not an excuse. I know that. I told him the same thing I'm going to tell you now because I mean it. I didn't raise him to be cruel. He wasn't cruel. He was weak in a way that the wrong person knew how to exploit. That's different. That doesn't mean there's no accountability. There is, and he's living it. But it means I wasn't going to burn down the rest of our relationship over it. He's in counseling now. He calls me every Sunday. He brings Ava to visit me in Macon once a month, and I take her to the park, and we walk slow, and I point at the birds and tell her their names, even though she can't understand me yet. She's 7 months old now. She grabs my finger with her whole fist and doesn't let go. I'm telling you this story, not because I want you to be angry at Simone or sad for me. I've done enough of both to last a lifetime. I'm telling it because for years I let my love be something that could be extracted from me without my consent. I thought that saying no, to my son, to anyone I loved, meant I loved them less. I thought the money and the yes, and the never asking too many questions was how I showed up for people. It wasn't love, it was fear. Fear of being the mother who wasn't enough. Fear of the empty chair at the table. Fear of the silence after the phone stopped ringing. The moment I put that paper on the table in their dining room, something changed in me that I don't think is going to change back. I stopped being afraid of my own no. I have one piece of advice for anyone listening who recognizes themselves in this story. The people who truly love you will not ask you to fund it. Real love does not send you a payment request. Real love does not block you from your grandchild's bassinet. Real love does not hand you a fabricated contractor estimate and hope you don't look too closely. You are allowed to love someone and still require them to be honest with you. You are allowed to give generously and still draw a line when the giving becomes exploitation. You are allowed to be a mother, a grandmother, a woman with a history and a heart, and also someone who knows what she's worth. Ava grabbed my finger again last Sunday when I was singing to her, that old hymn my mother used to sing, and she held on so tight that I laughed out loud. Donovan looked over from the kitchen and smiled, the real smile, the one that goes all the way to his eyes, and for just a moment, everything I'd been carrying for 3 years felt like it had found somewhere to land. I don't know what tomorrow looks like. I don't know how the legal situation resolves. I don't know if Donovan and Simone divorce or reconcile or find some other arrangement I can't predict. Life doesn't come with tidy endings. But I know that I am in my granddaughter's life now. I know that my son looks at me and sees his mother again, not a resource. And I know that this heart of mine, the one that gave and gave and gave without stopping to ask whether it was being treated the way it deserved, is still beating, still full, still mine.